Next up is Anna M.M. Vetticad, a well-known Indian journalist, author, and cultural commentator. She's an advocate for women's empowerment and the representation of marginalized communities in popular entertainment. And someone who's written extensively on the representation of women and minorities. Anna, tell us, what are your observations on the difference in gender representation in cinema in different parts of India? Like, for instance, how would you compare Hindi and Tamil cinema when it comes to holistic portrayal of all genders?
While we are specifically discussing gender representation in South Asian entertainment over here, I think the state of gender representation across the world is troubling. So
Hmm.
the fact that we are discussing South Asia doesn't mean that it's a paradise elsewhere. I'm just clarifying that for the benefit of non-South Asians who are watching this. But with regard to your specific question, I think the pandemic has been a great time for those of us who
Hmm.
are observing gender and the public's reaction to representation. Because
Hmm.
during the pandemic, people were watching cinema from people who don't conventionally watch films in languages other than their mother tongues started experimenting with language
Hmm.
cinemas on OTTs. And this translated into a fallout in theaters also. And some of the earliest theatrical hits during the pandemic were in languages other than Hindi, in
Hmm.
North India also. And this led to an uproar because people started saying Hindi cinema is finished and so on and so forth. But apart from that, the one thing that was really striking, and it should actually have struck everyone earlier too, is that gender representation across Indian languages, irrespective of the language and the state, is so troubling. And there are so many commonalities in the way gender is treated and in the way women specifically are treated, in the way sexual harassment is glorified and treated as and portrayed as an acceptable form of courtship, where domestic violence is normalized. And you can see this in all the films that became massive pan India hits in dubbed versions in various languages also. Yes, it's not just that there are very few films with female leads. It's also that there are films in which, even in films that are supposedly thinking films, sometimes you find women completely marginalized. Um, Even in films which are about other marginalized communities. For instance, some of the anti-caste cinema coming from Tamil Nadu, which is fantastic for the way it is mainstreaming discussions on caste, you will find almost no central female figure. And
Hmm.
again, when it is cinema that has trans characters within the protagonist especially, we're still at a place where largely the actor playing the role will be a male star. And we're still at a place where the representation is so bad that one has to look at the portrayals by male stars playing transgender women and analyze whether comparatively they are more sensitive, in comparison with those where transgender persons are being completely caricatured. Obviously, this is not an ideal situation because India does have transgender actors. We have had films in which transgender persons have played transgender characters, but these are few and far between. So the state of gender representation is, on the one hand, one could say that because of burgeoning OTT platforms, there is an increase in shows and films with central female characters. But that's the sort of thing we as women say to ourselves because that's the only way we can retain our sanity and peace of mind. Because if you focus on how much there is left to be done, you'll probably go crazy. The fact that even now it's 2023, and we have there are scenes in which rape is romanticized through song
Hmm.
and dance, as it was in the film Bahubali, which is one of the hugest Indian film hits, a Telugu
Right.
film. um, And again, because I was talking about caste and how sometimes, very often, you see that even in films that seek to foreground caste, the representation of women and gender at large is problematic. There was a Tamil film called Pava Kadhaigal. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there is this, it was an anthology, and there is a short within the anthology where Sai Pallavi and Prakash
Mm.
Raj are playing father and daughter, and she married out of caste. And the tone of the film is almost as though there is sympathy for the father, because, you know, if the father is angry with his daughter for marrying out of caste, the tone of the film cannot be empathy for the father, but the tone of that film was actually empathy for the father. And this is
Mm.
supposed to be a film that is foregrounding caste, but it's
Mm.
foregrounding even caste in such a problematic way. But
Right.
part of the reason for this is, Ekta, that very often those who control the money don't want
Mm.
to finance films that have women leads. Shelja
Mm.
has very rightly pointed this out. But I was just wondering, and I'll put this to Shelja and hope she'll address it later. I was just
Mm.
wondering whether also confirmation bias determines these decisions, because we have this film called Afwar right now in theaters. I think it's a very
Mm.
good film. It's a very
Mm.
bold film that's taken on communal issues in a way that Hindi cinema is certainly not these days. But it's
Mm.
doing, as of now, opening day collections very bad. Now, the
Mm.
general discussion on social media is that Indian audiences are lazy, and they're not, and they only want to go for big budget masala cinema to theaters, and they'll wait for this to come to an OTT, which is a
Yeah.
very conventional way of looking at it. But look at the complexity. The film was barely publicized. So is it that the
Mm.
Indian audience doesn't want to go, or is it that the
Mm.
Indian audience isn't aware of it? So again,
Mm.
because I want to address the example Shelja gave. Now, if
Mm.
Kareeb Kareeb single had been a hit, I can
Mm.
guarantee that the entire media covering Hindi cinema and
Mm.
production companies would have credited the success to Irfan Khan. But because it did not become a hit, so then the logic becomes, oh, but you know, the casting was problematic. You have a woman who is not in her 20s, and she doesn't conform to conventional Indian notions of what a good looking person is. By the way, I think Parvati is extremely attractive, but that's a different question. Because it didn't work at the box office, the confirmation bias of the media, the audience that is assessing it, and producers comes into the picture. If we can
Mm.
look at the complexity of why Afwa is not doing well on day one, we need to look
Mm.
at the complexity of why Kareeb Kareeb single didn't do well. There could be so many other reasons apart from the casting of the female lead and the characteristics of the female lead, because this female lead, Parvati, has given hits in Malayalam cinema. And at the end
Mm.
of the day, the people of Kerala and the people of the Hindi belt are ultimately, we have so many cultural commonalities. And I think
Mm.
you can see this with the careers of so many major male stars. A
Mm.
major male star can have six flops, the media
Mm.
will not write him off. But a Vidya
Mm.
Balan has one flop, and everybody is saying, see, we told you, no, Vidya is an exception, and look, already she's flopping. But Vidya has given so many hits, you will not give
Mm.
her the space. You will not allow a
Mm.
woman the space to not be perfect in every possible way, including box office collections. It's as though
Mm.
the industry, the ecosystem, everyone is setting us up for failure.
Mm.
So, gender
Mm.
representation, when we talk about it in cinema and on OTTs, let us please address every aspect of it, from the money
Mm.
bags to the audience to the money bags' unwillingness to build an audience for films
Mm.
with women and transgender persons and people across the LGBTQ plus spectrum as
Yeah.
leads, casting, etc., and our
Mm.
society. Everyone has a role to
Mm.
play in this. And I, as a journalist, I say that I think that my profession has also not played a sufficient
Mm.
role in fighting against an
Mm.
industry that does not want to fight this battle with women and the entire gender spectrum.
Mm. Well said, Anna. Thank you for voicing that, which I think a lot of us do feel that it's not there's not enough push coming from the various different stakeholders in this to get the gender representation uh, to help it move in a more positive direction as we move forward. And Anna, earlier you spoke about how we portray certain male behaviors, and it's kind of normalized. There's this culture of toxic masculinity I see in Indian films, and this whole even sexual harassment of girls is normalized. There'll be a male protagonist who stalks the woman, the female lead, and she gives in finally, and that's considered normal. So how is this influencing the normal man on the street? And do you think filmmakers and film stars are taking responsibility for the damage that these movies are doing?
Before I answer your question, I just want to address something Shell just said, because she pointed out that sometimes people think that just because a woman is producing, that means everything, all issues are sorted. But I've spoken to so many producers, women who are producers, and they tell me that when it comes to raising finance, the minute a woman comes to the meeting, immediately those who have the money in their hands immediately want to cut the budget. And if the theme of whatever film or show is being made is woman centered, again, immediately they want to cut the budget, and not just the budget of the content production, but also the budget of the marketing. So there is such a male gaze, not just on content, but on the audience, the assumption that the audience wants what that particular man in the seat of power who is making decisions wants. And it's so hard to understand why intelligent human beings don't recognize that there is a diversity in the audience. And you, as a producer or a financier, you are coming to a project with your life experiences, whether it's your gender, your caste, your class, and so on and so forth. And how do you not see around you that there is this diverse world with people with different experiences? And this applies to the content creation also. I remember I was doing this interview with Ramesh Sippy. You know him, of course. He made this huge, iconic film, Sholay. And during the course of the interview, because I was, prodding him about why he has not made more films with central female figures. And at one
Hmm.
point, he said, I have to make the films that come naturally to me, right? And so, this is a question I always raise with male directors, writers, and producers. How is
Hmm.
it that content about women doesn't come naturally to you? And why are you not asking yourselves that question? Because we form 50% of humanity. How do you not see us around you? We are your friends, we are your colleagues, we are your mothers, sisters, daughters, we are everywhere. It's almost like there's a physical problem. They're not seeing us, and therefore they're not seeing our stories. This is why,
Yeah.
of course, we need more women in content creation. But again, Ekta, there was this film, a Kannada film called Garuda Gamana Vrishabha Vahana. Okay, much discussed, even acclaimed. And I remember I saw it a while after all the reviews had gone and all of that. And I was so startled because the film doesn't have a single woman character. There's
Hmm.
one woman who is on screen for a couple of seconds who smells something and goes to a well and realizes there's a body there. That's her role in the film. There's another woman who's a voice on the phone, and there's another woman whose back you see from a distance. How, how on God's earth are you making a film where there are no women? Like, how is this humanly possible? It's not just about marginalization, you're erasing us completely. So, I think, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten your question because I got so carried away with what I was saying. But
No, but
we need.
are the film stars, are the filmmakers realizing that this is creating a problem, and are they taking responsibility?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Firstly, they won't realize it unless we, as the audience and as
Point it
journalists,
out.
hold them accountable, because their gaze is so narrow and limited, they don't see it, which is why they are turning to a woman journalist and saying, should I not be making films that come naturally to me? Instead of asking themselves why they don't see the women, the LGBT plus persons, the Dalits, the Muslims, the Christians, and the Sikhs around them. But your
mm,
question, I remember now, was about how sexual harassment and problematic male
yeah,
behaviors are normalized on screen. And
yeah,
often
yeah,
the justification given is, but we are living in a patriarchal society where men behave in this fashion. So let's not
yeah,
be childish about it.
mm,
Anybody with a degree of maturity knows that it's in the tone of the filmmaker. And the thing we are objecting to is the tone of the
mm,
filmmaker.
mm,
Rape happens in the real world,
mm,
sexual harassment
mm,
happens. As women, we all experience misogyny, patriarchy, experience violence, but it is the tone of the filmmaker and the gaze of the filmmaker on the female
mm,
body and on that
mm,
violence that we are that we are questioning. Are you
mm,
romanticizing that rape?
mm,
Are you giving a veneer of comedy to the sexual harassment? Are you
mm,
treating the stalking as a as a natural form of courtship? Is there no
yeah,
character? How is there no character around that woman who is pointing out this problematic behavior? Why are you
yeah,
showing that the woman herself was pretending that she meant no when actually she did mean yes? And this is
mm,
across Indian languages. And there's an osmosis, right? Of course, there are.
mm,
We live in a patriarchal, society where women face violence all the time.
mm,
Where transgender persons face violence all the time. But are you portraying a reality or are you glorifying a problematic
mm,
reality? This is the question,
mm,
right? And
right,
again, the other thing, are these
mm,
films influencing the public?
mm,
Constantly, when you ask filmmakers this, they will say, oh, well, if films could influence society, then the whole of India would have become saints after seeing Gandhi. This is such a,
mm,
this
mm,
is such a, you're trivializing the issue over here. Firstly, we all know
mm,
that to push a kid over the edge and make a good
mm,
kid a bad is much easier than making a kid
mm,
who's constantly in trouble reform,
mm,
right? So, that's
mm,
natural human behavior. But in any case, when we have this whole ecosystem, which is
mm,
telling a young person or anybody that it's perfectly okay to
mm,
pester a woman who is not interested in you, and your parents are talking
mm,
about it as though it's a perfectly acceptable thing, and your classmates are talking about it the same way, you see the same
mm,
thing in books, ads, on plays, on hoardings, and in films. How
mm,
can you, and you are some extra special human being, how can you
mm,
not be influenced by all of this? And if
yeah,
there is one film there that shows a
mm,
woman objecting to such behavior, and if there is even one young man in the audience who sits up and says, wait, there's a woman who doesn't think this is okay, really?
mhm,
And that starts a conversation for that person, it's made a difference. So, it's not
yeah,
as silly as a guy is going into a film that is very feminist and he emerges a feminist from the hall miraculously. Obviously, we're not saying that. But there is a
yeah,
lifetime of experiences that a person goes through, and how are
mm,
filmmakers, film writers, directors, and
yeah,
film journalists, what role are we playing in creating awareness? I'm not making
mm,
films, but at least the least I can do is question films that are portraying women and violence in this terrible fashion. And
yeah,
let me tell you, Shelja, you were talking about the battle of being a producer. Let me tell you that I've been a journalist now for 29 years, and it took such a long time for me to get out of this space where I was being constantly told that I am too serious and that I need to
mm,
lighten up because films are just fun and they're frothy, and I should look at it and just be have a giggly approach to writing and reporting on them. And of course, there were spaces that there was limited space for the kind of writing that I do earlier, and that space is becoming even more limited right now. So, but if I am asking filmmakers to please fight these battles, then I had better fight these battles too. It's difficult, of
mm,
course, it's extremely difficult, but one has to push and question. And so often, people who are emerging from a patriarchal society, which is pretty much the whole world,
mm,
sometimes they just don't realize how damaging,
mm,
how offensive, and
yeah,
and how much the content they produce can influence us in big and small ways. Even if I watch a film and it doesn't change me, And but it traumatizes me as a woman, because I have, as all of us women have gone through, we've experienced violence. Why is it okay for them to do that? To show rape scenes which are intended not to make us feel terrible about the rape, but to titillate the audience. Why is that
Yeah.
okay? And when you do this, Ekta, there is pushback. There is not just
Mm.
editors telling you no one wants to read this. There is abuse from the audience that is supportive of that kind of cinema. But also,
Yeah.
I can assure you that it'll take time to build, but you will find one by one people coming out and saying, "Did you also feel this way? Oh my God, I thought that I was the only person watching this song in the film Bahubali, sitting in the audience feeling horrible, or watching that song in the film Pushpa the Rise and feeling terrible about it because the whole audience was cheering. And I am feeling less lonely with my opinion because you said it, which means there's at least one other human being out
Yeah.
there who feels as bad about it as I do. And if, as a
Yeah.
journalist, I can play that role, then I'm happy. But
Yeah.
the the pushback from us to the film production companies and writers cannot stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a very good point that you're bringing out. And each of us has to do our bit, whatever we can do in our own ways, whether we are filmmakers or we're writers or we're activists.